Meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education for Monday, September 11th, 2017 is called to order. We're at the Oregon Senior High School Innovation Center. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll?
Ms. Feeney? Present. Ms. Odorico? Ms. Flanagan? Present. Mr. Raymond? Mr. Kraus? Mr. LeBrun?
Present.
Mr. Zott?
Present. The board has a quorum, and Ms. Odorico had advised me a couple weeks ago that she would be absent. She's traveling with her husband this week, and Mr. Kraus is at back to school night, and he will be here as soon as that's finished, and he advised me of that in advance. I have proof that the meeting has been properly noticed under Wisconsin Open Meetings Law. I have those proofs here, and if anyone needs to see them or wants to see them, they'll be with Ms. Wick. Our agenda tonight includes several action items approving contracts in our preliminary budget for 2017-18, and then a variety of informational items. We'll also do a short work session to finish up our workshop activity from May 18th, and we have a real short closed session to do a midterm evaluation check-in. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second? Ms. Feeney? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. We have an agenda. Item A on the consent calendar. Is there any item on the consent calendar that any board member wishes to remove for consideration?
I'll move to approve the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Since this is a contract, there are contracts in there. Ms. Wick, would you call the roll on the consent calendar matters?
Ms. Flanagan? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Mr. Zott?
Yes. Consent calendar items are approved by a 4-0 vote, and we'll make signatures to the contracts. And Mr. Raymond has arrived.
Sorry, flat tire on my way home.
Item B on the agenda is communication from the public. Board Policy 180.04 has established the opportunity for any member of the public to address the board. Janie, has anybody checked in?
No.
Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to address the board? Doesn't appear to be any, so we'll move on to information item C, OEA, and I don't see anyone from the OEA tonight. We have a new student rep. Yay. We've gone all summer without one. This is Carolyn, right? And it's Christofferson?
Yeah.
Great. Well, welcome. Why don't you tell the board a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go from there.
As Mr. Zott just said, I'm Carolyn Christofferson, and I'm going to be I'm a senior here this year at OHS, and I am one of the Student Council co-presidents this year, and I will be serving on the board in the first semester, and then Ellen Martin will be taking over the second semester.
Great. Where are you going next year? Have you decided?
Don't know yet. I'm still in the application process. So.
Great. What do you want to study?
Thinking engineering, so.
Good. Thanks. And you're a swimmer, I take it?
Yep, just got done with practice.
Okay. Good. And then Carolyn and I are going to meet. We're going to set up a time where we can meet and kind of discuss roles and what we'd like to hear from you at the board meeting. So welcome.
Yeah,
We look forward to having a great semester with you.
Happy to be here.
Okay. Action items. D1, 2017-2018 United Way contract CBITS, and this is a contract that we've seen before in the past, a renewal of that. Anybody want to talk about that? Candace? I see you coming up. I don't know that we have. Why don't you go over and join Gina there so we can get you mic'd.
So this is very similar to what you saw last year. CBITS is our Cognitive Behavior Intervention in Schools program that we do at sixth grade. We screen all of the sixth graders, and our percentage was 97% last year of the sixth graders took the assessment, and then they participate in a 10-week intervention program. So the program is designed to address just the most significantly needy students that have identified as having trauma. So those that are high in anxiety or depression or single categories like that are seen differently. So this year, we are in the consortium with Madison, and they had a 3-year evaluation program. So there's an addendum on this contract that talks about the recommendations from that evaluation. And many of the items are things that Rome Corners has done quite well, but there are some things in there that we could improve on, and we want to look at some of the items, particularly those things that travel into the 7th grade year and beyond, to make sure that we are meeting the needs of all of our students. So, if there are no questions, I just request that you approve the agenda, or I mean the item, for the next 3 years. I think the MOA goes for 3 years. I'm happy to come back and talk more about it in the interim years, but you could approve it for the 3-year period.
Gina, you've reviewed this as district legal counsel?
I have.
Okay, are any issues with it?
No.
You recommend its approval as to form?
I do.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions? Mr. LeBrun?
Do I need to take?
All right. So all of the sixth graders, well, 97% of the sixth graders took the assessment, and then you group the ones that are most significantly.
So it narrows a little bit, so those who are flagged high on the first screener then go through an interview process, and then by the time we get done, this year it was actually a higher number, so we had 9 students that actually met the criteria for the trauma, so it was high
Okay.
in several categories. Normally, the groups are about 4 or 5. This year, we had 9 students that flagged high on it, and 7 of them participated.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other board member have a question? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the MOA for the CBITS program for a 3-year period of time. Ms. Flanagan with the motion, is there a second? Mr. Raymond with the second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Janie, would you call the roll?
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Mr. Zak?
Yes, that motion carries by a 5-0 vote. Thank you, Candace. And
Thank you.
we look forward to having an informational update in the next year or so regarding the program and how we're doing in it. Great, thank you. That takes us to item D2, which is the annual meeting agenda for our annual meeting, which would be 2 weeks from tonight, September 25th. And we need to publish that agenda, so that's in your packet. Brian, do you have anything to add for the board? Pretty typical of the budget, the agendas that we've had in the past.
Yeah, it is a standard annual meeting agenda, nothing really different with the exception of under new business resolution C and item, I'll say resolution D, on the purchase of a utility pole, and C is the sale of real estate to Gorman and Company. And the reason that it's on the annual meeting agenda, we only have authority to sell property that's granted to the school district by the electors. And later on in the agenda, I can walk through the sale of real estate to Gorman, or if you'd like me to do it right now, I can probably do it in 2 minutes.
Why don't you take care of it now? I think it's germane.
Okay.
Enough that we can get
When-
it out of our way.
Here's all the legal documentation from the sale of the Gorman property in 2006. And in spite of our extensive legal documentation, somehow in the certified survey map, we missed a 6-foot wide strip of property that runs from Main Street back to the Oregon School District. The Gorman Company is looking at purchasing the property immediately north of their existing property line, and that's how they identified this. So in order to clean it up, again, our intent in 2006 was to sell the entire property. I'm not certain if it was a CS certified survey map issue, or if we just missed it, or in the drafting of the documents we missed it, but we learned we still own a 6-foot piece of property. Andy and I met with the Gorman Company representatives, and obviously they're interested in that property, And we said we could bring a recommendation to the annual meeting and get elector approval. The idea that we have is, since we intended to sell that entire property in 2006 and for whatever reason didn't, we would sell it to them for $1 and they would cover all of the legal costs associated with recording and finalizing the CSM. So I thought we had this issue put to rest, but we get to come back and do part B a few years later. So if you have any questions, either Andy or I can respond.
Or anything about the annual meeting agenda. Tim?
I was looking at that little tiny strip of property, and it looks like that garage is on that strip of property. Is that may have been part of the issue that kept that strip off the rest of the property?
Based on an aerial view, I think that property, the garage was on Oregon School District property.
Okay,
But
that's
in-
what it looked like.
In 2006, we did not know that.
Okay, thanks.
So we own 6 feet of a garage, which is very valuable interest. Probably. I know, I have a toboggan I could put in there. I've been looking for a place for that too. So anyway, any questions about the annual meeting, budget hearing and agenda? Okay, then we would need a motion to approve that so that we can get it published. Ms. Feeney with the motion, is there a second? Mr. LeBrun with a second. Any discussion? I think we can do this by voice vote. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed. That motion carries, unanimous voice vote, Janie. That takes us to item D3, which is our 2017-2018 preliminary budget. This is a step that we need to do so that we can publish the preliminary budget in the paper so that it's ready statutorily for the annual meeting. This is a preliminary budget, as Andy indicated. Secondly, we had talked in our staffing discussions several months ago about options that we would have with unassigned dollars in the budget. That discussion still will be had because we'll have some unassigned revenue per budget. So in October, we're going to be meeting again once we firm up some of the variables that Andy's going to talk about and we get approval at the annual meeting. Then it will come to us with a variety of options as to how we want to allocate that unallocated portion of revenue right now. So there is a sum of that. The budget came in optimistically high, we were thinking, and it came there, and our growth has been there, so that we have some decisions to make, which a lot of school boards don't have. And so, but that's an October discussion. I'm working with Brian and Andy about presenting various options to you that we have. So, Andy, why don't you talk through then the preliminary budget?
Sure. As Mr. Zock said, process-wise, we're hoping that we can get approval this evening. We do have a preliminary budget presentation that we do at the annual meeting. So by approving this evening, we are able to put an advertisement in the paper as required 10 days from that meeting. So it would actually go in the paper this Thursday. So the numbers in here are preliminary. There are pretty good numbers as far as enrollment. Enrollment drives our budget, both enrollment from residential students as well as open enrollment students. We're still working through that. The high school, for instance, is obviously the largest building, and we're still kind of trying to figure out if some of our students are coming or are not coming, as well as the open enrollment. We have those issues as well as other schools tell us if the kids are coming or not. Now that we're a week in, that's starting to be a little bit more solid than what it was before school started. So those things are being worked on. Like I said before, like Mr. Zock said before, we do have some unallocated funds. Rather than bringing those choices to you at this point in time, we thought we'd bring them to you in October so that you kind of know what the full picture is and how much the dollars are. But we are looking very good. We have the staffing plan covered, which was approved last spring. And then we also have year 2 of the teacher compensation plan implemented with this preliminary budget. And we do have some funds left, which we'll need for year 3. Equalized assessed value, I've taken a little look at that. It's because the growth a lot of our growth in the school district is in Fitchburg. Right now, all I can look at is the entire city of Fitchburg. So the assessed value of the district is estimated because I don't know how much of the growth in Fitchburg is related to Oregon and how much is it related to Madison or Verona school districts. Both of those also have property within Fitchburg proper. So we'll, I believe the 5.5% number that I put in here is probably conservative, and my hope is that it's going to be higher than that, which will help lower the mill rate. Fitchburg and Village of Oregon saw a significant amount of new construction, which just the way the tax levy works helps reduce the impact on the current residents in the school district. Again, we're looking at about an additional $1.5 million in funding from last year. That is attributed to both growth as well as the anticipated increase of $200 per student. That's been proposed in the current Joint Finance Committee resolution, which the legislature is starting to talk about this week. We have total faith at this point in time that that $200 per student will happen based on the agreements between the legislature and the governor. I'll talk a little bit about, because it is a fairly significant amount of money, talk a little bit about our our budgeting process, where our expenditures will actually exceed our revenues. And from a financial point of view, business manager doesn't like saying that, but we have kind of a process in our district where funds are not expended by different departments. We actually carry those funds over for the following year so that nobody gets into this lose them mentality if you don't spend it. We'd rather have people intentionally spend those funds rather than spend it just to get what they can from it because they're afraid they're going to lose it. So I'll talk a little bit about those things. There's 5 main things that are on, I think, page 1 or page 2. 250 or so, $250,000 is basically related to building budgets. So that's the 6 buildings, all having a component of not spending all the funds that were allocated in the prior year. The second item is $300,000 related to departmental budgets. Different areas there. Technology is a large component of that $300,000. We were very busy spending money, but we were spending a lot of referendum money and trying to kind of make sure that everything's working and covered this last year. A new number, which we haven't talked about in the past, is the $672,000. That was related to not spending all the money that we got for the teachers' compensation system. So as you recall, there's a 3-year phase-in of that process, and so that money was left over and is reserved for one-time expenditures related to the teacher compensation program. And then the last 2 are fairly small, and actually number 4 was actually based on board action about 4 or 5 years ago at least, actually in 2011-12, where there was money allocated for virtual curriculum and high school online curriculum. Some of those funds have been spent, but there's still a balance from that we've been carrying. And lastly, you may remember that there's some vocational education funding that's happened over the last couple of years that the legislature has been funding related to basically those experiences that our students have with businesses that Mr. Granberg works with, and those funds have been allocated for that incentive grant, and those funds weren't entirely spent this last year, so we left those for him to spend in the future. And there's also some restrictions on what those monies can be spent for. And lastly is $120,000 for our technology infrastructure program, which was actually started 5 years ago. This is our 5th year of implementation, so we will not see that happen anymore. So those funds were all assigned in our fund balance by myself through the audit process, and so you'll see those monies when we talk about the audit in the future as well. That's what makes up this carry forward into this next budget. Are there any questions about that? Yeah, Krista.
I just have one question about, I understand departmental budgets, but what are things in building budgets that would not be budget?
So mostly, the way our building budgets work is we allocate a certain dollar amount per student, and for the most part, that dollar amount per student, depending on the level you're at, is fairly similar, a little bit higher at the high school. And so That can be anything that the buildings just didn't spend this last year. They just didn't have the need to spend this year, but they might be saving up for, in our case, we've had a lot of people saving up for technology or for musical instruments or for something that they want, but just weren't able to pull the trigger on quite yet. So that's the majority of that. I would the majority of those dollars is obviously proportional to the building. So the larger building, the high school, had the majority of those dollars left over. And again, I think a part of that is related to when there's time, we can manage those budgets a little bit better. This building specifically, this last year, was busy building everything, and as well as there was a furniture budget at this building that was close to $1 million that we've been implementing as well. So they just didn't spend all the funds.
And Andy, while we have a technical situation in our budget where the expenses exceed revenues from an operational standpoint, we're at a zero sum.
Yeah, if you take out those assigned funds that we put into the audit, and you say those are one-time expenditures, you take that out of the equation, then we're always aiming for basically a balanced budget, or exactly a balanced budget. So if we would have spent those dollars, we'd have nothing carried over, and therefore you'd have revenues equaling expenses.
Yeah. So the budget is balanced other than for these carryovers.
Correct.
Good. Okay.
Absolutely.
Anybody else have any questions of Andy regarding the preliminary budget? Recognizing that in October, we're going to be talking about allocating money. Barb?
Couple questions, looking at the revenue budget.
Okay. It looks like you're expecting a decrease in transportation aid and library aid compared to what we actually got?
Yeah, let me
Last year?
talk, the transportation aid, I'm not as familiar with off the top of my head, but I can talk extensively about library aid. We had a situation this last year where we had budgeted more revenue, and library aid is based on, I believe it's a department at the state, and I can't remember, like unclaimed property or something of that nature. Do you remember? Division of Lands, and they allocate a certain amount of money for library purchases.
And if you get a speeding ticket, you contribute to Wisconsin Public Libraries.
Well, that helps a little bit.
So that's consolation if you ever
Yeah.
get a speeding ticket.
So based on how the state and their collection process, that changes. That number is not known to us until January or February of each year. Well, obviously, we're already into the budget year. And so this is the first year that it hasn't grown. So usually we'd peg the number based on the prior year. This year it actually went down fairly significantly. I want to say $20,000, and we were kind of left holding the bag and trying to say, "Hey, folks, don't spend all the money," because it was allocated in their tier budget. It was given to them up front, so they knew how much to spend. So we were like, let's. This is the first time that's happened. Let's kind of step back and figure out if we can come up with a new process. So what we did was we said, we know it's going to be at least $100,000, so we're going to budget $100,000 in library. We're going to allocate that to the librarians and let them take it out of the school tier budgets, out of the principal's hands, and work the librarians to come up with how to spend those funds. It was done on a per student basis. And then once January comes, we will find the actual number out, allocate the additional monies proportionally to the schools, and be able to hit the number without having overspent, and basically have a plan in place. They'll have spent 4/5 of the money already, but then they'll just have some extra money that they'll have to spend between January and the end of the school year. So that's why it's underestimated. It's intentionally underestimated, knowing that we'll revise it once we get the final number in January.
Okay. And just to be clear, that first column, actual revenues, is what was actually received.
I'm going to try to get to you. Do you have a page number there?
Page 2.
Page 2. Yep. Yes. So the first column is actual 2016-17 revenues. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Compared to the budget, and then this.
Okay.
Yep.
So last year, we ended up getting more than we expected, but we don't know if that's going to happen again this year, looks like.
Actually received $10,000 less. The original budget was $130,000 for library aids, 920.
Oh, sorry, I was talking about transportation.
Oh, you were talking transportation. I'm sorry. Transportation, you're right. We did receive more than we had budgeted last year, and it looks like we're budgeting a little bit more than we had budgeted last year, but not as much as we received.
Okay.
You're correct.
That's it.
Tim, you had a question, I think.
I had a question just about that. It wasn't specific to a line item. It was about the special education fund.
Okay.
I was just trying to understand how that $5 million flip-flops back and forth. I know the fund needs to be empty at the end of the year,
There needs to be a zero at the end of the year. Yep.
but that doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be spent by the end of the year.
Basically, any funds that are not, so the $5 million transfer is a budget number, and it's our best bet based on what our expenditure estimates are in Fund 27. And whatever the actual expenditures are in Fund 27, we then transfer those funds from Fund 10 to Fund 27. So if that fund doesn't require as much money as we're planning, then the transfer is left, and those dollars are left in Fund 10.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay.
And it happens to be $5 million? 4.9 million?
Yep, I'm going to go to the page here, 4.992854. If you go to my favorite sheet, which some of you guys are too new to know, but my favorite sheet is called the fund summary sheet because it's totally at the 30,000 foot view, and you can I could talk you through how that works, but that's the number on the right-hand column that's called transfers, and that's what it is. The only thing that's transferred is between Fund 10 and 27.
Okay.
Chris, any questions? Okay, Dan, welcome.
Nope. There you go.
Okay. I had just one general question, and just because it's in the back of my mind, I love how we pulled the rabbit out of the hat, but can you show me where that is in the budget again?
The rabbit out of the hat. Are you talking about the idea that I had at Netherwood Knoll when we talked about that?
Yeah, it allowed us to contribute from general funds towards the teacher compensation plan,
Okay.
so that we only had to ask for maybe a little more than half.
Yeah, so that is actually anticipated to happen the third year of the comp plan right now. That's something that we might want to talk about in the future, whether we actually do that. Only because I'm a little worried about cash flow with the size that the budget increase has been. But the idea there was basically to take a little over $1 million in fund balance. You guys haven't been moving around much over there. And basically take that and anticipate spending it for debt service for our unfunded liability for the next 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And the reason I didn't start that process now, which would have freed up another $350,000 in this year's budget, is we didn't need to. And if you look at our fund balance and our working cash, we are getting very, very close to having to take a loan out in order to meet payroll in, I want to say, January. And so we can do that, but there is a policy, our financial policy, that says if we ever hit that point, then we have to come up with a plan in order to build fund balance so we don't do that anymore. So I erred a little bit when I suggested that we could do that because I only looked at the ending cash amounts on a monthly basis, and the payroll hits the middle of the month, and so that one payroll we could be at jeopardy of needing to have cash, which wasn't our intent. But I'd only looked at ending cash balances when I came up with that proposal. So my hope is that we don't have to do that. We can still fund the 3-year teacher comp plan. Or at a minimum, we don't do that until the third year of the comp plan, so that we can get a little bit further along in the implementation of this.
Is it too late for us to do that this year then?
It's not too late, but It would give us additional funding, and we, as Mr. Zock kind of introduced this item and said that we have some additional unallocated monies at this point in time that we haven't allocated to anything, and we're going to actually talk about that in October. So you would just be increasing the amount of money that we would have at that point in time.
Another question about the building budgets, just in general, do they seem to be holding over just about the same amount every year? Or are there any buildings that are actually building up a surplus year to year because they're able to roll their budgets over?
I would say I'd want to look a little bit more at the trends on that. As just a quick observation that I've noticed, and this is nothing against my colleagues here, when you're new to a position, you typically are conservative with your budgeting. And as people get a little bit more comfortable with working with the budget after a couple of years, then they typically spend down those fund balances intentionally. And I've been good with that because I understand that there's other things that they're trying to manage as they kind of get into the job. So that's kind of the thing that I've noticed over time, as administrators get a little bit more comfortable with their budget process and stuff, they do spend those balances down. We've had a little bit of administrative turnover, so I've seen those balances go up a little bit over the last couple of years. But they know, because we talk about this at administrative team meetings, that we need to eventually spend those funds in a planned, strategic way, so that they don't rely on those year to year.
And specifically, I think the building budgets are on page 7. Is that right? Or
Yep, let me get there. I believe that's the tier budgets, how we allocate it. Oh, wait a minute. 6. Yes, this is the tier budget allocation method, and it does talk about what the building targets are, yes.
so in the second half of that page, it talks about expenditure budget per student on different things. And are those in dollars?
Yep.
Those are not in thousands?
No, those are dollars per student. So the bottom half of it is kind of probably a 20-year historical thing that we modify year to year based on how we came up with allocations per student. And some of them have been there forever. Some of them have been modified based on us taking district level budgets and distributing those on a per student basis. For instance, tech printing allocation, copier printing allocation, paper, those were all at one point district level budgets. And it didn't make a lot of sense for me to try to figure out how 6 buildings were going to spend those expenditures. So I said, hey guys, why don't we take these dollar amounts and distribute them per student, and then you can keep those funds rather than me keeping them or not having enough based on a year-to-year basis. So that's how we got to it. And there was a second component to that. If you look at the dollar amounts, the total expenditure budget in orange right above that, you'll see that the 3 elementaries are exactly the same. And then the middle school and RCR are within a couple bucks, and then the high school is a little bit more. The other component to there was that I was intentionally trying, there were a little bit more differences between the elementary and middle school and RCI, and I've been intentionally trying to get those to be very close to the same. So that was the other component of that, is trying to get them there. The high school has a little bit more dollars allocated to it, but there's a footnote, it might not be on here, it might be, that we do have Dr. Bergstrom manages a curriculum allocation for the K-8 schools, that if you added that on a per student basis would get those schools, K-8 schools, pretty close to the high school's allocation. The high school has to manage those curriculum allocations within their dollars. So it's pretty much apples to apples. Everybody pretty much gets around $280, $290 per student.
So specifically on the bottom of that sheet where it says Camp Gray, $2.67.
Yep.
I'm not sure how to read that. If I go up towards the top, it says Camp Gray is $18,000.
Yep. You want me to talk you through that?
Yeah.
Sure. So the bottom part is an allocation that's taxpayer supported. A number of years ago, there was somebody thought that Camp Gray, which at the time was probably actually Wyalusing, that we would provide $2.67 per student to help fund that trip. The top part is actually revenue based. So how much revenues were collected from Camp Gray from our parents was $18,237. A number of years ago, we had, probably my first or second year here, the principals had to go and constantly look at one account to figure out how much they could spend. And we made the strategic decision to say, hey, rather than you chasing your tail, why don't we do this? Why don't we give you the amount of money that you brought in from the prior year to the penny into the following year? So that $18,237.50 was actually collected last year, and we'll provide it to them this year. For the most part, these dollars don't change that much, so it's not a big deal on the budget, and it allows them certainty when they're budgeting.
So that's 18,000 is collected from parents?
Last year. And
Okay,
now
and then the district adds in $2.67 per student. Okay. And with the athletics numbers, I mean, the difference between the schools can also be largely seen by high school athletics cost more, it looks like.
Yeah, we pulled out the athletics a number of years ago from the high school budget, and Mr. Carr manages that, both the middle school and high school, based on a per dollar amount for each of those allocations. You see the middle school's at $33 and the high school's at $88 per student. And then we put that into one budget that Mr. Carr manages between the two programs.
So it's no longer distributed like this between the high school and the middle school?
I'd have to ask Mr. Carr how to do that. I think it's pretty close, but I don't know for sure.
So just probably not the time to get into this in depth, but the hockey team has always been complaining that everybody else gets free sports. When do we get ours? So has there been any talk with the athletic director about maybe increasing this number so that we can subsidize hockey in a similar way that we do to other sports?
I don't think that's been a discussion. It's definitely been a discussion from the parents to us. And the reason that it maybe has not been a discussion is, again, I've become kind of the historian on this. So I was with the district when hockey was brought into the district from a co-op program. And at that point in time, the board's actions were, we will provide this level of funding, which was basically for the coaches. And then the hockey program needs to pay for everything else. If that's something that the board wants to revisit, I don't know that we would have a strong objection to it. But that was the last action from the Board of Education.
That helps. I had not heard that.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, I was on the board when there, and the expenses were pretty significant to starting the hockey program, and there was a strong desire to do that. And so the agreement that was reached between the hockey program and the district was, we'll sponsor you as a sport, we'll provide a certain level of funding with the understanding that you pick up the rest. And that's why we had it in the first place. So that Andy's right. That was the board's quid pro quo with the hockey program to fund it.
That's all I have. Thanks.
Jeff, did you have any? Did that spur any questions over on this side of the table? You are now not as strong as you were at the beginning of the meeting because we've got more people in. Yeah. You still outnumber that side though. Anyway. All right.
We're wiry, though.
Yeah. Brian, you have a comment that you'd like to make?
Andy, could you go to page 5?
I'm there.
This is often a page that board members look at because it goes back to 1999, and equalized value is all of the school or all of the property, all the taxable property within the Oregon School District. Then tax mill rate is a mathematical calculation based on that equalized value. And I just draw your attention. In 2009, you see 5 years in a row of minuses. That was during the housing, I'll say meltdown for lack of a better term, or perhaps the 2008 recession. You'll notice in 2014, the year that the community approved the $54.6 million referendum, the tax mill rate actually went down. And yes, if the community had not approved the referendum, it would have gone down more. But in terms of timing, the timing for that referendum likely could not have been any better. And to look at 2006, just last year, the tax mill rate went down again, and that was the year we added $1.5 million with the teacher compensation referendum. And the school district has benefited from strong economic growth in the last couple of years. When you look at the details in 2016, one thing that led to the reduction in tax mill rate was the district received an additional $1.2 million worth of state aid last year, and the timing was just perfect for that to come in at a year when the district was bringing on additional expenses associated with the teacher compensation plan. I would love to say that was all well planned and all well laid out, and sometimes we are the beneficiaries of good economic conditions. And very few school districts could look back over the last 3-4 years and see drops in their mill rate when they add just under $60 million worth of debt. And then to follow that up, you all know how complicated it is when we add ongoing expenses like the teacher compensation plan, and we end up in this kind of financial look. So I know you get questions from the community on tax rate, and this would just be a really good page to study and to highlight those points, because we are in a very enviable position relative to other districts and able to take on two of the board and community's biggest initiatives, a capital referendum and a teacher comp referendum, and now in 2017 to see our tax mill rate being lower than it was in 2009. So pretty amazing story.
Yeah, one of the things that the strong economic growth in the area has done is allowed us to have our equalized assessed value increase and then decrease our mill rate. The counter to that is, as we continue to grow, we have more students here. And so if you look, one of the things I look at when I review the preliminary budget is the expenditure budget and the increases over a period of time. We have a significant increase this year in expenditures between 6 and 7%. That's attributed to the fact that we've got more students, and we noticed that when we allocated additional resources several months ago to fund additional teachers, and then also when we funded the teacher compensation plan. So that's what's driving that number. We're lucky, as Brian says, that we've got some growth here, both in terms of students and EAV, that's able to drive down the mill rate significantly. But it's one thing for the growth task force to watch out for as we continue to grow, and we'll be pushing capacities again, and that means some additional expenditures. And the hope is, as we see with this budget, that the growth exceeds the growth in equalized value in students, and the revenue we get from that exceeds what we need to outlay in expenditures. That will drive the mill rate down. Right now, we're in a great shape. I mean, this is one of the better budgets that I've ever been on, as a board member, to be able to sit here and say, in October, we've got some planning to do, and we're working on a number of options, as Dan suggested. And maybe we look at, can we do something with teacher comp a little bit early and not hit fund balance, or can we reserve a spot there? I don't know the answer to that. Andy and I had a little conversation before the meeting about doing that. We got to keep an eye on health insurance, and do we kind of pre-plan for a couple years and create some budget holes to be able to absorb some health insurance costs, so that any additional funds from that we get can be used to fund personnel costs because of growth. So, our challenge is not only to think about the immediate year in the budget, and Andy's always been one to articulate that, but if you've got some flexibility in this year, think about other options out there that we can look at, not necessarily in 17-18, but also 18-19 and 19-20. Can we create some gaps? And that was part of Andy's planning that allowed us to have a revenue cliff that dropped off, that allowed us to add $54 million in long-term debt and not increase significantly the tax rate. So that'll be our challenge in October, is to look not only at year 17-18, but maybe some options in the future. But thanks, Andy. This is really good news for the district.
Welcome.
Any other questions here first before I'll get back to you, Dan?
I assume we're going to vote to approve the preliminary budget, and because of the fact that it looks like fund balance is going down, do we need a supermajority to do that?
Because if you look at the policy, if those dollars that it's going down are based on myself assigning those dollars based on carryovers, the way the fund balance policy reads, and Gina can correct me if I'm wrong, it's only if the assigned fund balance goes down. I'm sorry, the unassigned fund balance goes down. If it's assigned, then it's okay, and that's what we've done in the past. So I don't know if you get the distinction, but basically I assign those dollars left over in those different categories that we talked about earlier, and because those balances are the reason why the fund balance is going down, it's okay.
And we'll get a fund balance report later in the year based on the 16-17 audit and show where that is. I suspect it's going to creep up a little bit maybe. But we're close.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but we'll find out.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Good, then what we would need is a motion to approve the preliminary budget that's presented tonight. That will be published in the paper and serve as the basis for the annual meeting and the electors' approval of the levy at that time. So I entertain that motion. Mr. Raymond with the motion, is there a second? Mr. LeBrun with the second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Janie, would you call the roll?
Mr. Raymond?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Kraus?
Yes.
Ms. Feeney? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes.
Mr. Zoc?
Yes, motion carries by a 6-0 vote. Thanks, and then we'll get that published according to the state statute, and the electors will have a chance to vote on the levy in 2 weeks. So pursuant to the agenda that we just published. Thanks for all your work, Andy. This is not an easy thing to do.
No problem.
Yeah. That takes us to section E of our agenda. E1A is from policy, and Krista.
We have not met since the last board meeting.
B, Vision Steering Committee, Mr. Raymond.
We will be meeting next Wednesday, September 20th at 7:30, and we will be hearing the final version, I believe, of the report from the consultant that the Student Population Growth Task Force has been working with.
Okay, that takes us to item F on our agenda, information items, learning pathways update. And Leslie, that's yours, right? And you've got a little presentation for us, so we'll give you a minute to get set up at our table. I think we've got a mic for you now. And the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. So tonight's just a little informational update on where we are with our professional learning pathways, which, as all of you know, are sort of the underpinnings for our teacher compensation system. It was really about taking this really tremendous opportunity that the community has given us and use it to increase our effectiveness with our kids. And we want to connect our professional learning to what we value and what we know to be effective, which is really a key thing, because there are a lot of interesting things to do. There are a lot of fun things to do, but we really want to be able to narrow our focus to what we know to have the greatest impact on our students. And so people often ask why professional development is the focus of the compensation system, right? So the idea that teacher quality is the key determinant in student achievement is not new in research. That's been around for a very long time, and it's been extremely clear. So teacher quality is the key factor over which we have control. Consequently, our resources should be put into developing teacher capacity to be the very best educator in the classroom that they can be. And also because we know we want people in our district who always push themselves to get better because they care so much about the kids. And I believe that's who we have, and that's why I think that a system that gives us some focus will really take off and fly because we already have such terrific people. And we also know that PD has to be job embedded, practice focused, and ongoing. Now, I think another really good point is that everybody is starting to get on the same page with this. People in the area agree. For example, CISAs now rarely offer one-day classes. If you go on the registration professional development list, you'll see that they're offering one topic with the cohort taking something 4 or 5 days spread out over the course of the school year, because they know now also that it really doesn't help teachers or support changes in practice to go to one thing for 2 hours on one day. That doesn't do anything. So we're trying to design our professional development system to take advantage of what we know to be effective professional learning. And as I said earlier, the importance of focus. And it's not just one researcher who says it, it's researcher after researcher that talks about what we know to be effective and focusing on those few things instead of many, many things. And it's also really important that the teachers see the tie between what we're doing at the district level to what's happening at the school level. And I think a really good example of that, although I'd say there are good examples of this at every one of the schools, but the high school's theory of action for the past 3 years now has really been something that teachers can use the district level professional learning to dig deeper into what they're doing at the building level for theory of action. So really, it's all about developing systems that make sense to people, where one thing supports another thing, and nobody feels like they're chasing the shiny balls in different corners of the district. All the focus, all the concentration is on what we say is important, which is challenging because there are a lot of cool, fun things out there. So focus can be really challenging. But where we've decided to focus our professional learning for this upcoming year are in 3 different pathways that have been developed. And the first is new educator. Colleen Christensen, the mentor, has put together learning opportunities for a full year that helps our new educators learn about the district, learn what's important to the district, and meet all of their professional development needs through a series of professional learning opportunities, and includes partnerships with people like Dane County New Teacher Project, because our new teachers get to pick, I don't know if they get to go to 5 out of the 8 sessions offered for Dane County for new teachers. So not only are they learning to do things with one another, but they're also able to go out and talk to new teachers throughout all the districts in Dane County and do some learning together, which I think has a lot of value. And I also think anytime our teachers have an opportunity to talk to teachers from other districts, it usually makes them really happy to be here. So I like to let people get out and meet others and collaborate, and then they come back and they're usually feeling really good about where we are and what we're doing, which is a great thing. The next pathway is on educational equity, and you know that has been a district priority for some time now and one of our 5 core values. Of course, we have the district equity leadership team that was trained all last year to lead foundational learning that everybody will get. But then the people who are really inspired get to go deeper and use their 5 days toward learning on this particular subject. And we currently are working with 2 other consultants that work for area school districts also, and have been National Equity Project partners, and they're putting together classes for Edgewood and classes just for Oregon that will follow the same format that we've been talking about, where it takes place over the course of several days, it's job embedded, and it's relevant to what they're doing right now. And then the next one is highly effective practices, where we're concentrating very specifically on practices that can be utilized no matter your subject area, and we know are high yield related to student achievement. And I'll talk about those in just a moment. So people often ask, well, whole child is one of the most important things about us. When you talk to our new educators, it's one of their favorite things about the Oregon School District. When we get their feedback at the end of new educator orientation, what stuck out for you, what was a strong theme, the whole child component is almost a unanimous favorite among the new educators. So people often ask, why don't you have a strand just for that? And we said, well, we consider it to be so fundamental to everything we do that we don't want to separate it out from anything. Consequently, we will continue to offer professional learning related to our concept of the whole child, and no matter what pathway you're in, this will apply to it. So if you want to learn about effective practices, we don't want you to ignore the fact that mental health first aid could also make you a more effective teacher. Consequently, you can do both in this system. So people will log into My Learning Plan, and there's a district catalog of learning activities, and as things are developed, they're added to the catalog, and in the catalog it says specifically if it's aligned to a pathway, and so people are able to decide what they're going to do and where they want to place their area of emphasis. Here's an example of a 2-day event we had this summer, and the facilitator is coming back to do coaching for the participants. And the facilitator was one of the few people in the nation trained on the anti-bias standards through the Teaching Tolerance Organization. And she came and worked with about 25 of our educators over the course of 2 days and got them really excited. And then they were also able to request curriculum hours to apply what they're learning to the classroom. Because another repeated downfall in education's history is we send people to things and they come back and they're so busy that they never have an opportunity to actually utilize what they learned in their classroom with their kids. So now, one of the things we're implementing is anytime you have a learning opportunity, you have an opportunity to request up to 2 days of curriculum time to integrate what you just learned into your students' learning experience. So people aren't attending things and coming back and checking it off their list. They have an opportunity to make it a part of what the students do every day. So we'll have sessions that are online and face-to-face, or a blending of the two. They'll be offered after school. We have a few things coming up on the weekends, quite a few things in summer, and we're prioritizing sessions that are not one-shot scenarios. The majority of our sessions, our goal is to have 80% of everything we offer be facilitated by our own Oregon colleagues. Consequently, we're prioritizing the funding of train the trainer models, but it may take a while to build our internal capacity, especially related to equity, where we are able to offer our own sessions. But we are working with outside partners. As an example, Edgewood is working with us to create a course specific to behavior management for our new educators K through 8, because that is often the area where they feel they need the most support in their first year of teaching. So our new teachers will be signing up for this class, which in a wonderful way is also facilitated by an Oregon teacher. It's an Edgewood course, but it's an Oregon teacher who's teaching it to our new teachers. So our effective practices pathway is focusing specifically on the use of learning targets, feedback, formative assessment to inform instruction, and student goal setting. And these were selected for 2 reasons. The first, because they are considered high impact on not just Hattie's effectiveness scale rating, but in researchers across the board. And this little visual on the side is an example. This was at a brain conference in San Francisco that one of our principals went to, and she took clips from 3 different researchers as they were speaking about high impact practices, and they were all saying the exact same thing, even though it's separate people, separate research. The other reason we selected these is because all of these things work together to empower the students, right? When they know what they're learning and where they are in relation to that specific target, when they're getting timely feedback, when a formative assessment is something that's done with them and not to them, when they're setting their own goals and monitoring their own progress, all of these things are empowering. And that is also in alignment with our goal to personalize the learning experience. And we also have been stressing to teachers that we not only is it about the practices, but we completely believe that content knowledge is another important piece of it. So we won't discourage people from continuing to deepen their content knowledge in addition to their instructional strategies piece. Then, as I mentioned, our other pathway is on equity. And we've spoken about that a few times before. But we have, as I mentioned, some really good forward momentum on things that can be offered for our staff, Oregon-specific events. But we also have staff that are participating in Madison events as part of like a book study, for example, with several dozen teachers, or not just teachers, but teachers and community leaders from the area. They're members of our adult team participating and then bringing that back to us. I mentioned new educator. And then there is the possibility of educator-developed pathways. And a really excellent path that's already been developed by some teachers is we have, I'd say, 7 teachers involved in the Greater Madison Writing Project. And that is through the university. And they did 2 weeks of intensive, I would say it's almost like writing camp this summer. And then they're meeting and doing action research throughout the course of this entire year and the following. So through their participation in this Greater Madison Writing Project, they're really carving out their own professional learning pathway. And of course, anytime you're proposing your own, it would first need to be approved by your building principal. And as I mentioned, personalized learning, we wanted that to be a framework through which we looked at everything. Everything we do should be, how do we try to empower our learners and create a more personalized experience? Consequently, we selected specific strategies for effective practices, but also anything that we offer that is just the title of personalized learning, that will count for any pathway you're involved in. People often ask, because so many of these things are so interesting and so important, how can I narrow it down? Well, I think a really important way to think about it is you may start off in one pathway, but it should be about the needs of your students. So you may find times when you cross over into another pathway because of the needs of your students, and that's perfectly acceptable. And as we get into culturally relevant practices and the brain, people will find ways very easily that effective practices and equity combine or start to complement one another. And people would be keeping track through their professional practice goal form that they already fill out as part of their educator effectiveness process. So people will be reflecting on their knowledge and its impact on their students through this cycle that they already had to do anyway. So nobody has to do another layer of paperwork in order to show us that what they are doing is impacting their students. So we've modified our professional practice goal form. The DPI is in full approval of people doing modifications to their forms, and so that's what we've done in order to align educator effectiveness and our pathway system. A teacher recently wrote a sample professional practice goal that I thought was pretty marvelous, and so I've been sharing it with staff when I go out and talk about this. I'll let you look at that for a moment. Only they're not looking to show opportunity gas. It's opportunity gap. Okay, just so you know. And she wrote this so that people could choose either highly effective practices or equity, but just so that people could get the idea of how you could bring it all together into one. We're also explaining to people that in 16-17 we had a lot of flexibility because people didn't know that the referendum would pass. So we were very grateful, and we put together what I believe to be really high quality opportunities, but we had a lot of flexibility in what we said yes to. In 17-18, we want to keep a large measure of that flexibility, but add some focus to it. And we're going to organize all of this through sequence committees. Basically, our coaching staff is working with me on the effective practices component and putting together a comprehensive book list so that we can start with some facilitated book studies. And we put together common facilitator expectations. So if you're coming from outside our school district, you get sort of a brochure on our expectations for professional learning and the fact that we expect you to utilize our Apple Values logo. And we want you to make direct connections with what you are facilitating and what we value and what the strand is that you are now linked to. So that's put together in a document of about 3 to 4 pages, and the people who've received it thus far have found it to be very helpful. And then we want to be continuing to review and improve. So our sequence committees will be hopefully vetting learning opportunities. Sometimes they come upon us a little too fast to put a committee together. They're helping me with the compilation of books and articles. And they're looking at the feedback, because another required component of every professional learning piece we're offering is a feedback form, so that we understand what it is that people feel will positively impact their practice and what for them falls flat. That was a lot in a short amount of time. I apologize.
Jeff?
That sounds awesome. My question is, how unique is something like this program? Do we see other districts doing anything similar?
Well, I think all districts have priorities, and I think it's been around a long time to try to align your professional development system with those priorities. But I really don't know anybody who's doing it quite this way. I would love to find out. Because I'd love to be able to collaborate, or all of us who are working on it would love to be able to collaborate with other districts. And if we present at the School Board Association, maybe we'll come across some other people who are doing something similar.
Yeah, we submitted a application to be a presenter at the January WASB, and it was along the line of what we're doing here. So hopefully we're going to be selected for that and be able to present at that convention. Dan, anything? Questions or comments?
Yeah. Regarding the educational equity focus, I have really great hope for that, because it's something that our community has definitely identified as a need here. Is there anything that you found that has shown to work in other districts or any place that has had a gap in different demographic groups that brings the gap closer?
Yes, actually. And I think Jim would be happy to talk about it at any time. And one of those things that we know to be research proven in closing opportunity gaps is the AVID program. And that's one of the reasons why we sent a planning team to Minneapolis this summer, so that we could begin the stages of preparing to have a program ready for our students in 18-19. So there are things like that we know are important. But I think another really important piece is some of the work we're just starting with culturally relevant practices and neuroscience and the connection between those two things. Because multiculturalism is very important, and having an inclusive environment is really important. But moving students from being dependent learners to independent learners is what will ultimately help us to close existing gaps.
Thank you. I also had a couple of questions about the way this program is going to work for the teachers who are doing the learning. There's weekend classes, there's evening classes, there's I'm sure that are some offered during professional development days. Is there, I know that part of our idea behind this whole larger program is to treat teachers more like professionals. And part of that is to say that the teachers have so many days, and it's more days than it used to be, depending on their level. Do teachers, will they have an opportunity, one, to do more education if they want to? If they say, I don't remember how many, 205 days, if that's not enough for me, what if I want to spend 240 days and I want to work on my professional development in this time that normally I would be having vacation or whatever? Now, I'm not saying that teachers need to do that, but there's some go-getters in every group. Will they be able to do this? Will the funds be there for them to take extra classes or have more than one focus if they want to? And also, like, if they're doing weekend classes, is there some sort of comp time? Do they get that? Does that included in part of their 200 days that they need to do?
I'll start with the latter question first because that's the easiest. And yes, if they take a class for 8 hours on a Saturday, then that counts as one of their paid professional development days. So that works out well. But the other piece, that's a great question because we have people who are learners for a living. And so people are very enthusiastic and really care a lot about what they do. And consequently, I have some people who have already used all 5 of their professional development days and school hasn't began. And they're asking, I want to do this, now what do I do? So, I mean, that is actually going to be more of a problem than helping people to find quality opportunities. It'll be helping them to learn to focus so that we can continue to support people in what they're doing. So what we're telling people now is, if you've used up all of your professional development days, which mind you right now that means 7 days because they have the 2 floating also, and there are people who've already done this, then if there's something additional that you want to do, if it's something that the district office is asking someone to do, for instance, we want to send a group of people to a training to become trainers, then the district office budget would pay you an hourly rate to attend. Or you would talk to your principal and get permission for an hourly rate, or you would just attend because you were interested and you wouldn't submit a timesheet. I think all of those things are possibilities.
I guess what I had not thought about compensating the teachers more than what their salary is. I was thinking about paying for them to go to the conference, not paying them, but paying for the conference.
Yes, we will do that.
So if a teacher wanted to have 7 extra days in a year or more, then the district is offering to pay for whatever the conference is, that as long as the district thought it was worthwhile.
Yes.
Good.
Thanks, Dan. Krista?
I'm not exactly sure how to word this, but my question, and I think you touched on it in your presentation, but it's in regard to measurement and assessment of if the learning pathways are working and translating to student achievement. Can you kind of go back to that a little bit and talk through that and how you will know as administrators as a whole or individually with teachers if it's translating to more effective practices, or as a board, how will we know if this is effective?
That's an excellent question. So what we are talking about is really the same learning cycle that we're expecting of our students, we expect of ourselves, which is the idea that first the learning, and then the trying in the classroom, and then the analyzing the student learning, the evidence of student learning, what happened, including feedback in that process. And that could be coaching cycles, collaborative classroom visits, instructional rounds, or just visiting another colleague's classroom to give him or her feedback on what it is they're trying. And then it's reflecting on the process, and then it's sharing what is working. All of that whole process is captured in the professional practice goal form. So you start off by saying what it is you intend, and then mid-year you fill out the form again saying, what have you done thus far? What have you tried in the classroom? What have been the results? How have you received feedback on what you're doing? And then they fill out the form again at the end of the year. So it's the same thing that we expect them to do with student learning objectives as part of educator effectiveness. We've just adjusted it so it's all captured there. So we'll be able to, we being administrators and coaches and people who are part of helping support people in this process, will be able to talk with them about the impact of their learning on their students. Now, that's at the individual level. At the larger level, I think that we are going to be monitoring our regular Tier 1 and Tier 2 indicators, in addition to follow-ups with people regarding how they utilize what they learned with their kids. So not just the PPG form, but follow-up feedback forms. Because you're right, it doesn't make any difference what we're doing if it doesn't impact the student learning experience. And consequently, people have to document how it is impacting the students, which I'm sure isn't exactly a favorite, but I also know that just attending courses doesn't impact the students. It's what you actually do with it that makes the difference.
Thanks, Krista. Tim, you're good. Barb?
Couple questions. First of all, when you talked about the 2 days of curriculum time, that seems like a great idea. Is this when teachers are released from the classroom, or they're paid to put in additional hours? And basically, if I understand this, they are thinking through their own curriculum and how to incorporate the new practices.
They are, but we're really promoting collaborative experiences. So we're hoping we're helping people to work with others when they're trying to do this implementation, as opposed to just sitting in their room by themselves. However, sometimes people are classroom excused, especially if it's a subject area committee, like an official curriculum group. It might take place during the weekday. But if people are using the curriculum time as a part of their 5-day professional learning component, then it has to be outside of their contract day. So we have a group meeting for 2 hours on Wednesday night to begin writing units 3 and 4 learning targets for 3rd grade math. I mean, so people are doing these hours outside of their regular contract time for the most part.
But that's coming out of their 5 or
It
7
is.
days of
It
professional.
is.
Okay. And then my second question is, how does professional development differ for our specials like our SLPs and OTs, school psychologists, etc.?
Well, I know that a lot of our student services staff right now are choosing to take a heavy emphasis in the whole child, which makes a lot of sense, right? For instance, our guidance counselors are talking about creating a path specific to trauma-informed schools and how to dig even deeper in that piece. So there are people who are creating paths related to the whole child, and that makes a lot of sense for what they're doing. However, we specifically chose effective practices and equity because we feel like it applies to any role within our school district. So whether you're the school psychologist or the speech language pathologist, equity is still an area that you could enrich your thinking and your practice.
Okay, good.
Carolyn, I've just been remiss because I'm so used to not having a student rep to see if you had any questions. I would assume that during the budget stuff you really didn't want to plow into that, but do you have any comments or questions of Leslie right now? Good. Okay. Just in closing, thanks, Leslie. That was really a fascinating presentation to see where we're at. I think I reported a couple meetings ago that we get newspaper clippings at our firm to follow articles in the paper about other school districts and what they're doing, and the slight trend now of districts that had enacted compliance-based models of teacher compensation systems that were tracking hours and that, which we saw with Gina when we were on the committee and, checking off dots. They're starting to stop and think and talk more about going to a professional development model, and I think are looking at what we're doing here. So that's kind of fun to see that waiting had kind of tied in with everything that we've done. The second thing that struck me was thinking back to maybe 5 years, even 10 years for sure, how fundamental the language has changed here. We've been talking about this for a long time and shifting the paradigm to a student-centered learning paradigm, and the problem inherent in moving a structure but the language has clearly changed here. And while we're still at the beginning phases of implementation, moving the language and the dialogue is the first hurdle, and to see that that is happening is really encouraging. This is really cool stuff. I mean, one of the things is the challenge is, Chris says, how do we know we're moving the needle? And looking at the Hattie stuff, that keeps us focused on that. When we were talking about the teacher comp plan, and we got a lot of accountability questions, and it was, there's a segment that would still say ECT scores and pure numerical tests, standardized test scores are the best way to see how you're doing. To me, what's really encourages we're focusing on what's relevant, because we know that if it's relevant to our teacher and to our student, that there will be inherent learning, and that will be long lasting. And we need to make sure we measure that appropriately. And that's when you talk about the tier 1 and tier 2. We're going to do a little exercise when we go to our room, the culmination that we talk about the 5 levers and our value practices that we articulated a year ago, to see how they line up. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but that's a really good segue from this excerpt. Thanks, that was really terrific. Okay. That takes us to the next item on our agenda, which is, well, we've already done the Gorman Building, but back to school update. Brian, why don't you do that in combination with your soup report, okay?
Sure, I'll give board members a really quick flyover of what we've been working on for the last couple of weeks. On August 29th, we had near capacity in the Innovation Center with almost 125 paraprofessionals, and Gina put together a full day, and a number of A-team members worked with her on presenting and getting our paras up to date and for the start of the school year. Gina has done that for the last several years, and the feedback that we've received from paras has been encouraging, and let's make sure that we keep doing this every year. So that was a nice start to the school year. Then on Wednesday, August 30th, the principals welcomed back staff at the building level and spent time doing a building-based in-service that day. Then on Thursday, August 31st, we haven't done this for a while, but we pulled everyone together district-wide in the gymnasium. And we had the benefit of 3 of our high school students that shared short presentations with all of our staff. One was Carolyn, and she did an outstanding job, along with Ellen Martin and Jaleel Turner. And it's interesting, as we turn the clock back just a little bit, I know many of you were at the 2015 Visioning Conference, and one thing we heard from our Visioning Conference panel of students was, make sure and build relationships with us. Make sure and visit with us about schoolwork, life outside of school, etc. And that was exactly the 3 messages that our 3 students provided to all of our staff. It was nice to get all of our staff together in not only a symbolic way, but also to see the largeness and the depth of our entire school district. So I think we're going to do that again next year. We'll keep you posted on the date. We didn't have school. I think we surprised a few people. We did not have school on September 1st, Friday, September 1st. I thought there was only one district in Dane County that had school on September 1st, but last week when I was at the Dane County Superintendent's meeting, I learned there were probably about half of Dane County schools had school. The reason we didn't, Gina always does a school calendar survey, and about 80% of our parents said, please don't have school on September 1st. So again, we'll survey up our parents to see what the proper start of the day is. I also think it's a huge advantage to have that last weekend, and we weren't clairvoyant that we knew the weather would be perfect, but to have 3 days, actually 4 days if you include Friday at this time of the year, was great. In terms of our first day of school, it was Tuesday, September 5th. I had the opportunity to visit with a lot of happy students, a lot of happy parents. Not sure if they were so happy because kids were going to school, or if they were just so happy that their kids were excited and ready to be at school, and also a number of happy staff members. There's no day like the first day of school for teachers and for school staff. It's sort of the rebirth, the starting over of a new school year, and The level of excitement was super, super high, and a little different than previous years because at Brooklyn and Netherwood and Prairie View, all the construction was complete. There was no dust left. The pool was all set, or actually the pool was set before the end of last school year. RCI looks the way RCI looks, which is almost brand new, even though we didn't do anything at RCI. And then the middle school, for the first time, had all of their school facilities ready to go. And of course, the high school, we still have a little dust, and the lunchroom is not quite complete. It can be airy on some days if the plastic breaks free, but the plan, and I've answered this question to a lot of high school parents, the plan was always to finish the high school commons with the pupil services area at the end of October, beginning of November. So that was planned. That wasn't Findorf not being able to get done due to the rainy weather over the summer. Again, overall, the feedback that we've heard on our school construction has been terrific, and Findorf has been an excellent partner to make sure that our schools were safe. And I think I may have showed you in the weekly letter the picture of Henry Duquois holding up the little tiny occupancy permit. I expected it to be much bigger for $30 million, but it was just this little tiny occupancy permit in a blazing color. So I shared that with all staff on the first day as well. I'll transition quick to the superintendent's report. 16 years ago today, it was September 11th, and I forgot what day of the week it was when that September 11th hit. I do recall because it was a late start in the school district that I was in, and kids were home that day watching all of these events unfold, and I remember the chaos that was created as they came to school at different times because it was an alternate starting time. And for me, it's just a day that I will not forget. It feels like I'm 16 years younger. No, 16. Now I'm 16 years wiser. And that day will live on for our history forever. Someone mentioned something about ACT scores. We just received information from ACT. Again, I don't perceive us as a big ACT district, but you'll recall 2 years ago, we started with all other Wisconsin public schools where all juniors are required to take the ACT tests. It's not a surprise when I say our composite score is higher than the state average. You would expect it to be higher. It's been historically higher. I have a document that was embargoed by DPI, and now it's okay for us to release, so I'll include it in the weekly letter. If you want more information, you can just let Leslie, Jim, or me know, and we can provide you with some more information. There is background that goes back likely 5 or 6 school years on ACT. Also this week, I'll be sharing with you a new Village of Oregon comprehensive plan. It's a colorful map that Vanderwall and Associates put together, and it shows future development. I think the Growth Task Force might already have it in sort of a draft form, but I wanted to make sure that all board members have an updated plan. Overall, the start of school was really smooth, and that includes busing. We received very few busing questions. If you received busing questions, feel free to send them to Andy and to Mark or to me. But overall, by the lack of busing questions, I sort of leads me to believe we really got it right this year. And that's a thanks to our bus contractors who spend 2 days at registration. And this year we had a lot of new parents, and that was one of the busiest stops at registration on the first day. I will also just highlight the back to school in services. I won't go into a lot of details, but you heard from Leslie, all back to school in services were focused on our 5 priorities that you all set, which are really the same 5 priorities we've been working on for a couple of years. And I think that brings some consistency and a feeling that we're not constantly doing something new to all of our school staff. Additionally, tonight, I know a couple of you were late because you were at the open house at the middle school. Our plan with open houses and back to school nights is to have a growth task force table, similar to what we've done with referendums for the last few years, just to give people an update in terms of what's going on. Dan had a comment about the achievement gap. I didn't know I was going to say this until you mentioned it, but one of the really key tools that we've used for narrowing the gap has been a middle school program that I know some of you are familiar with, and that's called the Schools of Hope program. And mentoring has been a long-term tool to help narrow achievement gaps. In terms of the information that Leslie shared on our pathways, I trust that you walk away tonight knowing that our teacher compensation plan, while we're in year 2 of implementation, I could not be more pleased with how Leslie and our administrative team and the teachers involved in our learning pathways have brought that to life. That was a substantial investment of money and time and energy. Last year, for the five days after we were scrambling a bit after the referendum passed, to make sure those 5 days were valuable time that would guide instruction. And this year, the work with the 4 pathways. So I don't mean to brag, but I think we are ahead of the curve relative to professional development, and districts are contacting us on our professional development plan, and you should walk away knowing that that was a good investment and we are getting a good return in terms of professional development. I will stop and see if you have any questions on back to school or my report.
Looks like we're good. Thanks, Brian. And we're off for the 17-18 school year. Future agenda. In 2 weeks, we have the annual meeting. Are we contemplating any business items? After that?
Janie and I were having a conversation, and for the last 2 years, we have just done the annual meeting unless we had a special agenda item, and we did not have a special agenda item. So if it's okay with all of you, we would just have the annual meeting, and there would not be a regular board meeting following that.
Right, and that will be annual meeting will kick off at 6:30 here at the Innovation Center at the high school, without a regular meeting after that. Great. Checkout. What we'll do, let's go do checkout, and then we'll just recess over into our smaller conference room to do our little in-service activity and our short closed session. So why don't we do checkout here and then recess while we move. So Dan, anything?
Well, it's back to school, of course, and I was over at the middle school. Things look really great over there. I know Mr. Z was also over there. One thing that I was surprised, and I probably should have known this before I went over there, but my daughter has orchestra every day of the week, which was surprising to me that that kind of thing is offered for our students. I think it's really wonderful. I thought, well, orchestra, maybe you'd have it once or twice a week at the most, but 5 days a week she's playing her fiddle, or I guess it's violin. But that's wonderful. I missed last school board meeting because I was on vacation. I took the family and we went out west and had a chance to experience the total eclipse. And it was awe-inspiring. It was something that lasted 2 minutes that you can see yourself planning for years in advance to experience. It was just, people get addicted to it apparently, and I'm already thinking about what I'm doing in 2024 when the next one hits the shores of this country. The things that really stood out were, besides being with my daughter, is the natural things. The solar eclipse, being in the mountains in the middle of the night when there's no light pollution, and the Milky Way and the stars just glittering. and thinking about all the science that we've learned and the ability to predict these solar eclipses for hundreds of years. And we've had this ability for a couple of thousand to predict these solar eclipses. And now scientists are predicting other things, and we want to teach our kids that that's because our school board has pledged that we're going to run things according to science and numbers and what we can show and prove. And we should live our lives planning for things that we can prove. And I'm just looking forward to discussing more with the board about our environmental statement, sustainability statement, and science-based planning. So that's just a few thoughts getting back to school, science, and orchestra. Thanks.
Great. Barb? Tim?
I'm looking forward to, I'm kind of a numbers guy myself. And so I am looking forward to hearing more about the budget and what some of the wish list items are for the extra dollars that we're going to receive. And I know that we were very hesitant about planning for those extra dollars. We didn't plan for those. It was really going to be something, it was going to be a gift to us rather than something we planned on spending right away. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what the alternatives are for the coming year.
Jeff? Krista? And I don't have anything either. So why don't we, it's 8:05, why don't we plan on beginning our exercise at 8:15 over in the conference room, give us a chance to move with the goal of being adjourned at around 9 o'clock, if that sounds good. Thanks.